Hey everybody, welcome. So we're reading Thomas Jefferson, and it is an excellent book. If you haven't started reading it yet, I highly recommend it. Alright, let's begin, fam. We're on page 111. In the summer of 1776, Jefferson spent time planning for the difficult work of government. In one case, he wrote a proposed constitution for Virginia. See, I didn't know Jefferson wrote that constitution for them. In another, he closely followed the Congress's debates over a national government and the content of what Jefferson referred to as the Articles of Confederation. Jefferson also helped draft rules of procedure for the Congress. Rules of procedure. His suggestions speak to a hunger for order and the appearance of civility. Look at that. So Jefferson wanted order and civility. We don't really have that going on right now. No member shall read any printed paper in the House during the sitting thereof without leave of the Congress. That's interesting because a lot of senators sometimes have really weird little props that they bring in, but we never really know, like when C-SPAN portrays it, we don't know if they ask permission or not, and some of the posters are like really bizarre. Another, no member in coming into the House or in removing from his place shall pass between the President and the member then speaking. Maybe because it's a little bit of a sign of disrespect, right? And another, when the House is sitting, no member shall speak or whisper to another as to interrupt any member who may be speaking in the debate. Well, that for sure is not happening now. Remember when Nancy Pelosi ripped up Trump's State of the Union speech? And then she handed out pens. So she got a bunch of pens after they impeached Trump. He wasn't taken out of office, right? But she signed the document with a bunch of pens, then gave out all the pens. So a lot of circuses going on. A lot of circuses. Now, this is interesting because in the parliamentary system in the UK, it's much more louder. So Jefferson probably would not have liked that version. I prefer kind of the louder version, like in the UK. Jefferson believed civility an important political virtue. Political virtues, huh? So a political virtue is civility. And he largely practiced what he preached. He and John Adams once disagreed on the floor over a proposal to call for a day of prayer. Though he had seen the good uses of public appeals to religious sentiments in Virginia, Jefferson grew ever more uncomfortable with frequent political resort to orthodox belief. That's interesting because Trump just did a National Day of Prayer, I think maybe 3 weeks ago? Very recently. You rose and defended the motion. And in reply to Mr. Jefferson's objections to Christianity, you said you were sorry to hear such sentiments from a gentleman whom you so highly respected, and with whom you agreed upon so many subjects, and that it was the only instance you had ever known of a man of sound sense and real genius that was an enemy to Christianity. I don't know if you could call him an enemy. I mean, maybe he was just worried about, the separation of church and state, because he has the Puritans and the Quakers at that time, plus the natives, right? And Catholics too. So you really have a lot of different faiths mixing together at this time. So it makes sense, that maybe they would be a little nervous while they're trying to unite to overthrow the crown, that they don't want the religious squabbles to separate each other off so that they can't take on the crown, right? Benjamin Rush recalled to Adams years later, "You suspected, you told me, that you had offended him, but that he soon convinced you to the contrary by crossing the room and taking a seat in the chair next to you." That's clever. Jefferson understood a timeless truth, that politics is kaleidoscopic, constantly shifting, and the morning's foe may well be the afternoon's friend. Look at that. The morning's foe Might well be your friend in the afternoon. That's why it's sad when you see people separating their families over who they voted for. You'll see people, last year around Thanksgiving, people said, don't talk about other things than politics at the dinner table. Talk about dinner, like dinner topics, about Trump at the Thanksgiving table. Don't let your conservative family members have peace during Thanksgiving. That was actual movement last year. I remember. And so that's very sad because here it's like, hey, you guys can disagree, but in the afternoon you might be friends, right? But a lot of the left wing extremists really want to practice disruption, hardcore disruption. So you have reactionaries on both sides going at each other, and the people in the center are like, we can kind of come together on certain issues and talk this out without putting each other to the chopping block. So this is interesting. That's why it's good to read, what the people of the past did concerning politics. His wife's health remained such a concern that Jefferson sought to leave Philadelphia to return to Pasadena, Virginia. See, this is why, he suffered with his love life. He loved his wife, and he's trying to help America, and he's away from the person he cares about the most, and that person's sick. It's amazing, his personal struggles and trials that he went through. Commendable. I receive by every post such accounts of the state of Miss Jefferson's health that it will be impossible for me to disappoint her expectation of seeing me at the time I have promised, which supposed my leaving this place on the 11th of next month, he wrote Richard Henry Lee. The letter finished, Jefferson added a postscript begging Lee to come relieve him. Yet Jefferson had to stay to keep Virginia's quorum. He hated it. I am under the painful necessity of putting off my departure, notwithstanding the unfavorable situation of Miss Jefferson's health, he told John Page in August. So here he's talking to Page and he's like, man, I just wish I didn't have to stay here. Wish I could go be with my family. The sacrifice he made. And also the sacrifice his wife made. She's sick and her husband is doing his duty to his country. And she has to take it. And the country needed Jefferson at this time. They needed him. They needed his wisdom. There is no mistaking how significant Jefferson and his colleagues believed the scale of the American struggle to be. One of Jefferson's duties in Philadelphia was the design of a seal for the new nation, a task he shared with Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. I didn't know that they worked together to create a seal. Reacting to a proposal of Franklin's that invoked the parting of the Red Sea, Jefferson suggested Pharaoh sitting in an open chariot, a crown on his head and a sword in his hand, passing through the divided waters of the Red Sea in pursuit of the Israelites. Rays from a pillar of fire in the cloud, expressive of the divine presence and command reaching to Moses, who stands on the shore and, extending his hand over the sea, causes it to overwhelm Pharaoh. Wow, so Jefferson suggested that, yet look at that. Even though Jefferson, remember previously, he had objections to Christianity, yet he's trying to design a Christian symbol. That's quite interesting. The motto, it says, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. I've heard that saying a lot. That gets mocked now. But think about it. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God, because a tyrant is antithetical to God, is what they're contending, right? So Pharaoh was a tyrant, and Moses helped free people. So this is interesting. Imagine if that would have been the real motto, right? People say that. Now you know where it comes from, right? The founders were Moses. George III was Pharaoh. Look at that. Americans were the Israelites being led from bondage. Look at that. Fantastic. In truth, the British demands on the colonists were hardly outrageous. The expense of defending the borders was considerable. American wealth was substantial, and Edmund Burke made a compelling case in London for virtual representation. What does that mean? Virtual. The argument that the king and parliament were stewards for the whole empire, whether particular colonists could vote for members of the House Commons or not. Man, look at that. So, stewards, huh? Of the whole empire. I mean, beyond a certain point, the empire gets too vast. If you have to cross an ocean to your empire, I don't know, it just seems too far. It's kind of like how the Greeks and Romans kept trying to take over Alexandria and claim it as their own. It's just like, man, just stick to what's in your vicinity, right? I mean, Russia's pretty large, and China's pretty large. But still, when an empire gets too vast, they crumble. It's just too many different people who are not going to listen in one spot. Then again, you could say America has Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. So there's a debate to be had, right, on the size of empires, and at what point they start to crumble at the phrase. It's quite interesting. What do you think?